everyone to DC Hall to celebrate Dionne Irving and Quint book. I'm just going to say a couple of words at the beginning. I'm the director of creative writing. I'm going to harangue you about some upcoming events, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Osreen Vandervliet-Blumey, who's going to properly introduce Dionne with all the flags and banners that she is due. So tomorrow night, in this very space, we have two fantastic poets, Mike Corral and Valerie Swing. Sing?
Shung.
Sorry. Shung. Valerie Shung. They're phenomenal poets. They do very exciting multimedia work. They're going to be here tomorrow night. Please come. Next week, next Wednesday, former U.S. Poet Laureate Natasha Trethewey will be reading, at McKenna Hall. That Friday, November 11th, poet programmer Allison Parrish will be joining us for an afternoon workshop in poetry reading. Thanks, Matt Kilbane, for bringing her. Wednesday, November 16th, save the date, the MFA reading series continues with our prose writers in the art gallery here on campus. Not the SNIPE, but the art student art gallery. The building has a name, I can never remember.
Riley Hall.
Thank you, Riley Hall. With all due respect. Thursday, November 17th, we have a lunchtime talk with the scholar Kimberly Bain, who's going to be talking, I believe, about Black breath and the Anthropocene. The following, the week following Thanksgiving, we have Notre Dame's own Tess Gunty, who is currently a National Book Award nominee, will be coming here Wednesday, November 30th, to be in conversation with Jason Kelly from Notre Dame Magazine, talk about her career and what it's like being a famous writer, and so on and so on. And then Thursday, December 1st, we're coordinating with the St. Joseph County Public Library for a big event there. Tess will be introduced by our own Joey Sweeney. It's going to be a big community event. I hope we can all show up here and there. The final event of the season is going to be the Sullivan Prize reading with Maya Sonnenberg. Fantastic collection of short stories. I hope you can make all those events. Please put them on your calendar. If you want to get on our mailing list, you can email me or Paul Cunningham. We're on the website. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Osreen Vandervliet.
To be introducing my dear colleague and friend Dionne Irving this evening, and to celebrate the release of her debut collection, The Islands. Congratulations on your pub day. Chosen as an indie next book, The Islands has received rave reviews that celebrate the collection's assuredness and ambition. These stories, which Booklist calls as sparkling and sharp-edged as cut diamonds, are centered on the lives of courageous and proud characters who are unfaltering in their determination to survive the psychic wounds of exile and the legacies of colonialism that they transport with them into diaspora. Irving is a clear-eyed writer with a steady hand, and this collection announces the range of her talents as she navigates issues of social class, gender, and race in a tour de force that takes us through a journey across Florida, Jamaica, New Jersey, Panama, and London. Irving's focus remains lucid, her style precise and polished, even as she switches points of view and location. This deftness of touch allows her readers to quietly witness the unspoken and continuous mourning of her characters, who do not wholly belong in their adopted homes and who can no longer lay claim to Jamaica, which nonetheless emerges, quite miraculously, as a transnational site that existentially unifies these characters who live in perpetual drift. The islands become a shared prism of dislocation and of yearning, of colonial violence, and of a beauty that settles the most troubling of the characters' emotions. The islands are the origin, the center of the coordinate system where the characters' paths intersect as they travel away from Jamaica's history of colonialism into the twisted logics of diaspora, where the structures of empire manifest in new form. An unrelenting obstacle course that the characters meet with all of their joy and their rage, with a raw, unrelenting belief in their own dignity, and an intuitive understanding of the complexity of their vision and their ancestry. There isn't a character in this collection that will leave you indifferent or untouched. In one of my favorite stories, All Inclusive, we follow Anaya as she returns to Jamaica with her wealthy white lover, the poet. Once there, she is confronted with a sense of loneliness and disgust that she cannot purge. Here, the islands belong to no one. They belong to money, to the highest bidder. Anaya observes the way that money is passed from hand to hand, from the poet to the hotel staff, from the hotel staff to the children of white tourists, and back again. She comes to understand that the transaction that is taking place is really one of race and gender. But even as she locates the origin of her hate for the poet, which is also paradoxically the origin of her love, she remains trapped within the dynamics of their relationship. The story metamorphosizes from that of a forbidden romance to a story of escapist tourism and lands with a thud in the echo chamber of colonial rape. At the end, we watch Anaya as she looks out over the poet's back through the window, toward the edge of the world, beyond the edge of the world, imagining that she could rewrite history. There's a line from Edwidge Danticat that came to mind while I was rereading The Islands this week. Misery won't touch you gentle. It always leaves its thumbprints on you. Sometimes it leaves them for others to see, sometimes for nobody but you to know. Irving is masterful when it comes to transcribing that thumbprint into words. But there's also plenty of color and humor and intimacy in this collection. There's a verb and an energy that is contagious. The characters all have a fight in them because their creator does too. Like the young shop girl who spends her weekends chopping up meat tells us. You close your eyes and the rest of you becomes the machete too. Irving's sentences are sharp as cut diamonds, yes, but they also have the power of that shop girl's machete. They will slice you open and sew you back up. They are powerful and magical, extraordinarily honest and fiercely loving. Welcome.
So much for that, Azarine. It was really beautiful. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. I've been really nervous about this book coming out because it feels really personal for me. Even though it's fiction, it feels very much like a story about, or stories about my life and my family in a lot of ways. And I was going to read a different story for you today. I'll say that. I wrote one of the last stories in this collection in the summer of 2021 when my editor said, "I think we just need one more story for the collection." And then when she read it, it was a story about a stand-up comedian. She's like, "I like the story, but she's not funny." I felt like I had developed a type 5 for her, and so I'm not going to read that story because I reread it today and I was like, maybe only I think she's funny. But so I'm going to read a different story for you today, the first story in the collection. But I wanted to start by reading the two epigraphs that begin the book because I think they both frame the collection and sort of help to explain some of the themes in it. So the first is, "No man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main." That's from John Donne's Meditation 17. "We're going to help our people, help them right. Oh Lord, help us tonight. Cast away that evil spell. Throw some water in the well and smile. That's from the song Smile Jamaica by Bob Marley. So I'm going to read the very first story in the collection, which is called Florida Lives. In hindsight, I can see now that we never should have left San Francisco. My husband was unemployed, and I was working only part-time, teaching at a private elementary school, making papier-mâché, making eyes at the principal. We'd spent 7 years racking up credit card debt and taking jobs we hated. We played the lottery and blew the last of our savings on a Danish modern couch. We laughed, we cried, we were in our 30s, childless, broke, on the verge of a cliche. Until the call from a fledgling fern nursery arrived, looking for someone, anyone, willing to market their little company, willing to start over in Florida, relocation expenses included. Before we left, there was a party in our honor. Family, friends, old and new, lovers, enemies, co-workers. It was at a Thai restaurant in the Tenderloin, part charming teak tables, part roaches in the bathroom. At a table set for 20, we were toasted amid hot platters of pad thai and lemongrass chicken and so much wine. San Francisco and so many of the people there were part of the story of me and my husband, the past imperfect, the verb we could conjugate ourselves out of by putting the distance of a continent between us and it, us and them. We could pretend that things that made us different from each other in San Francisco, mine, an immigrant's understanding of the world, and his, a legacy of the W.E.B. Du Bois idea of the talented 10. That idea that a handful of blacks would use art and education to lead the rest of us to salvation, use their privilege to remake black life in America, didn't actually matter all that much. In the dim lighting of the restaurant, everyone looked a little nostalgic and a little relieved. And when anyone asked us, why Florida? They'd wrinkle their noses, looks of disgust telegraphing images of 6-foot-long alligators, bath salt-eating criminals, and that giant mouse presiding over his southern fiefdom of plastic and capitalism. I responded, did you know that Apopka, Florida is the international foliage capital of the world? As if that explained it, as if anything could. The two of us drank down our doubts, and then we drank a bit more, and with the booze and good vibes coursing through us, we messed around in the back of a taxi on the way home, like we used to when we first met. This was how we started our Florida lives. Our rented house in Apopka was walking distance from a swamp, freeway adjacent. Perfect. Florida smelled like Jamaica, like what I remembered of it, a mixture of rain-soaked earth and blooming flowers. In Florida, we were credit poor and cash rich again. Florida was like living in a giant discount store. Florida, with its miles of air-conditioned shopping plazas, its preponderance of drive-through liquor stores, and the rent that made it seem like you were living almost for free. In Florida, we made less money, but it went so much further. San Francisco broke was Central Florida middle class, and we could live like the bougie frauds we always wanted to be. Here, our dinners were feasts, expensive cheeses, $25 bottles of wine, meat without the orange reduced for quick sale price sticker. Oh, the luxury. In Florida, I played the part of the wife that my dark-skinned mother-in-law had always imagined, the light-skinned daughter-in-law there to inject some good hair into their family's genetic pool, to give the family that taste of the American dream that all of their hard work and private schools could not. In the Great Migration, his people had gone west, not north from the American South, starting from Alabama. Their California lives were going to be better than those of their kinfolk who went to Chicago. Their American dream would be glamorous. Their version of new black America would be envied. The transformation completed with that husband of mine, with his polo shirts, his affinity for German cars, his confusion that not everyone had a trust fund, a summer home, parents to call when you were in a jam. Their plan, as I understood it, meant a life that would bring them closer to white. Or closer at least. A plan to make slavery a distant memory. A plan not unlike my Jamaican family's own. That I was light-skinned and made the idea of the imagined future seem closer. I would give them the light-skinned grandkids that would have access to private clubs and better schools and all the privileges of near whiteness that his family could imagine and those that they couldn't. In Florida, I stayed home and played around with complicated recipes. My Jamaican mother's cow tongue soup and escovitch fish, his mother's macaroni and meatloaf. Love, American fusion style. We each gained 5 pounds. We stuck my husband's first paycheck on the refrigerator with a flourish. We bought more things we didn't need, teacup-sized succulents, an electric wine opener, and hung our new drapes, hot pink and cream, with aplomb. In the evenings, we dragged plastic beach chairs out onto the front lawn and watched a colony of bats circle our house at sunset. We watched them arc upward and wend their way in slow, concentric circles above the neighborhood. We toasted them with plastic cups, celebrating our escape. We were going to create a new version of Black millennial marriage, Black poverty chic, reverse aspirational. We were going to use the mass of land between us and our California life to evaporate what had been so messy and let the spell of Florida take hold. Secretly, I loved spreading out across the bed after my husband left for work, devouring whole boxes of hot and sticky donuts, and knowing that no one here knew us. Secretly, I hated my husband's colleagues at the fern nursery and their questions. You tan so well. Aren't you exotic looking? How come you're so much lighter than him? And where did you say your family's from? In Florida, we were the same and not the same. We were a young Black married couple. We were a unit. But I couldn't understand the rhythms of what it meant to be Black in the most American of American places. But my husband did. He knew what it meant to live in a neighborhood where we were the only Black family. He knew what it meant that his boss spoke of his hard work as if it were a novelty. Knew how to smile when someone asked if he knew their Black acquaintance from high school or college. Understood that he needed to be well-dressed at the grocery store, at the post office, at the car wash. These things were second nature. And me, I tried to pretend to understand. Me, I was taking lessons about how to be Black in the American South, how to be Black in Florida, how to sublimate yourself even when it felt unnatural. Together, we loved our new bicycles, buying wine in the grocery store, the plush seats of our new SUV, the easy life, the suburban life. Together, we hated the way Florida always made you feel like you were standing inside a damp basement, the word irregardless, and our neighbors. Our neighbors, oh, we hated them most of all. Even before we met them, we knew they weren't the kind of people we wanted to know. Yellow grass, cartoon print bed sheets in the front window instead of curtains, and cigarette butts like breadcrumbs from their carport to their patio. We had only lived in the house for a week when they rang the doorbell in 3 short staccato bursts. I peered at them through the peephole for a beat too long. My husband hadn't learned to be anything but casually suspicious of people. Like I said, he wasn't Jamaican. He told me to open the door. They weren't there to hurt us or to make our lives more difficult. It's a couple, he said. They're being neighborly. I opened the door using one arm to close off the space between my body and the door frame, my other hand on my hip, not opening the door all the way. They introduced themselves as Crystal and Ricky Fletcher. I didn't offer up our names, but my husband, oh, my husband, so trusting, hovered behind me in the brown and orange Formica tiled hall of our rented home, and not only invited them in, but invited them in to sit on our blue Chesterfield sofa, my blue Chesterfield sofa in dirty cutoff shorts. He was like that. He trusted all people to a fault. My mother said it was all the time he'd spent at private school. Too much tennis camp, she said, and not enough Jesus. For her, not enough religion was a straight path both to hell and to people like the Fletchers. Maybe those were the same thing. Crystal noticed right away how I looked at her. I'd never been good at hiding what I felt. I'm so sorry, she said. We've been working in the yard all day. I usually dress much nicer than this. It was a twofer. That yard hadn't been touched in 3 months. And Crystal's t-shirt read, I put the hoe in hotel. In Jamaica, you learn to back away from people like Crystal. My parents hadn't raised me in America to socialize with crystals. They had come to America to make sure I met people like my husband, Black people with more education than sense. They had come to America to keep me away from places like Apopka, but I hadn't learned ever to save a penny for every penny you spent. And here I was in Florida after all, stacks of credit card bills piled on a table in the front hall and Crystal on my doorstep showing me all the ways I'd failed. I offered our neighbors wine, which they guzzled greedily. Ricky wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and pushed his glass forward for me to pour him a second. Did you know that Lake Apopka is the 4th largest lake in the continental United States? It actually isn't. Did you know that it is teeming with bass? I was never going to find out. Ricky knew, and he also knew about the best spots in the lake to find those bass and about local real estate and the value of $1. When we got around to the subject of jobs, Ricky explained that he worked as a handyman for the Arabs, which he pronounced Arabs, who owned the Hojo on Main Street. He looked at me a little funny when he said it, like perhaps he was trying to figure out if I was one of them. They're the good kind, he said finally, holding out his empty glass for a refill. Not like the terrorist kind. Man, Patel even jump-started my car when my battery died last week. Hells yeah, Crystal echoed. They're good people. I inched closer to my husband on the love seat and farther away from Ricky's mud-caked boots. I squeezed my husband's arm to make sure he saw the boots, the ones leaving flakes of mud on our floor, but she pulled away from me, and so I asked Crystal what she did for work. Oh, I'm between things right now, she said, twirling a limp strand of dirty blonde hair around her finger. But I was working as a medical assistant in my last job, and I got to wear scrubs and everything. The idea of Crystal being allowed to do anything medical terrified me. I made an excuse about starting dinner. There was an awkward pause where I should have asked them to stay, but instead smiled graciously and took their glasses. In the kitchen, I performed the Caribbean magic my mother taught me to get rid of unwanted company, turning a broom upside down and sprinkling salt on it. It was either completely effective or wishful thinking, but moments later, with relief, I heard the click of the front door. As they passed by the kitchen window, they couldn't see me behind the thick crepe paper blinds. I heard Ricky murmur, "I can see he is Black, but what is she?" "I'm not sure," Crystal responded. "I can't tell. It's so hard to tell these days." And what was I really, I wondered, as I leaned over the sink, trying to hear the rest of the conversation. But by then they were too far away, and anything else I might have heard was muffled when my husband turned on the TV in the room. "They seemed nice," my husband called out. Nice. The word hung limply in the air between us. It meant everything and nothing. It was just what I'd said about him back when he was the cute guy in the next apartment, not the man I was going to marry, not the man I did marry. I mixed a vodka tonic and came into the living room. "They're horrible people," I said, sitting next to him on the couch. "The worst kind." "What kind is that? They seemed all right to me." I searched for a diplomatic way to say trashy. This was one of our San Francisco problems, the ways my husband accused me of snobbery. So I didn't respond and I gulped the drink instead. "And you," my husband said, prodding me ever so slightly in the rib, "I thought you were going to make dinner." We sat there and drank vodka tonics until the street went dark, until the infomercials came on, until we fell into drunken, ugly sleep, arms akimbo and mouths open. But I was right, and it didn't take long for my husband to hate them too. We heard their fights almost daily, especially in the early morning hours when the quiet drinkers have passed out and the belligerent ones are gearing up for a fight, and then it was "fuck you" and "nah, fuck you." We did not fight like this. We fought like white people on TV. We whispered things under our breath. We exchanged terse statements on Post-it notes throughout the house, like a study guide to the arguments we were having. We did drink, we did fight. We did not drink and fight, especially not in this Florida life, certainly not in this picture of ourselves that we were working so hard to maintain. The Fletcher's fights usually ended with Ricky sitting in his truck with the windows rolled down, listening to Metallica's Master of Puppets. After Welcome Home, there was a pause while he flipped the cassette over in the tape deck, and then we heard the rest of the album. Ricky listened to the album once all the way through if it was a small fight, but when things were really bad, when we heard the crash of plates or glasses, he would listen to it 3 or 4 times before heading back into the house. After nights like that, we'd see them heading off to work or getting the mail, and they'd smile at us innocently, as though the night had been devoid of shrieks and cries, and we hated them for that too. the loud way they railed at each other, the way they could pretend we weren't all hearing. Every time I would remember what my mother always said about screaming like a fishwife in the market. That was not going to be me. No, sir. We hated them more when they started borrowing things they had no possibility of returning. Cigarettes, rubber bands, ice cubes, Cokes, flour, the kinds of things that require a trip to the store to replace. They never went to the store. Other than greasy paper sacks of fast food, I never saw them bring much into the house at all. I kept our pantry stocked, like I had been taught, enough food to take us through an apocalypse or two. So it shouldn't have been any surprise when roaches flooded into our kitchen. No amount of sealing off could keep them out of the house, and at the hardware store we learned that in Florida, a blend of kudzu and heat, a mixture of north and south, a dangling participle on the United States, they were called palmetto bugs. But they were roaches, all right. We spent the weekends caulking and filling in gaps and trying to figure out how they got in. Roaches don't die easy deaths. They survive nearly everything, a model in which we took solace, something for us to aspire to. The Fletchers seemed to turn up just as often. In the middle of our private, shameful behaviors, eating strips of cold steak from the refrigerator, watching sitcoms, tequila-fueled karaoke contests, normal stuff, they rang the doorbell to ask for something or just to talk. In the evenings, my husband always tried to say we were on our way out or had just come home. We're on the phone to my frail and quite incidentally dead grandmother over the landline to Jamaica. The days were harder. I wasn't working, and Crystal liked to stop by to drink my expensive coffee and complain about Ricky. But mostly she just asked questions, each a kind of song where the response was incredulity. San Francisco, she'd say, as though I'd grown up on the moon, or your family's from Jamaica? Before repeating the tired old stereotypes, the ones about ganja and Rastafari. As if my family would ever know Rastafari. Who was she kidding? Her other favorite topic were our two neighbors in the cul-de-sac, a retired couple and a deaf postal worker. They're so fucking stuck up, Crystal said one day when she cornered me out in the backyard as I pulled crabgrass from the lawn that was nearly beyond repair. My husband and I pictured plastic patio furniture, a little kettle grill, something Florida, something kitsch. Watching me at this task, performed in khaki shorts, would have destroyed my father, whose wedding toast to my husband had ended with the admonition that if he was marrying a lady, he'd better be able to afford the people that a lady needs to be taken care of. In my mind, it should have been Crystal pulling that grass while I sat on the porch. They seem harmless, I said. Oh, you don't know the half of it? She sat with her legs tucked under her on the cracked concrete patio, picking off the ants that migrated to her arms from the nearby anthill. What makes you say that? I asked, throwing another weed onto my growing pile. Well, like last year when we had a party, that postal bitch called the police. Like she could hear anything anyway. And then Ricky got in the cop's face and told him he had a right to have a party any damn time he wanted to. Even though she didn't continue, I had an idea where the story ended. See what I mean? She said, stretching out her leg. Total assholes. At the end of our 6-month in Apopka, the day we saw the Remax sign on the Fletcher's lawn, we celebrated. We went to dinner at an Indian restaurant. We ate tandoori chicken, basket after basket of naan, and my husband touched my leg and looked at me in the same way he had in the back of the taxi. And for the first time ever, we talked about children, imagining who they would be and what they would be like. We chose ridiculous, overly ambitious names, Winston, Phyllis, and Basil. We were optimistic. Here we were in the only state that offered second chances as readily as orange juice. We were at last free, even from the Fletchers. The grass on their lawn turned brown before Ricky backed a U-Haul onto their driveway. From our living room, we pushed aside the drapes and watched as they loaded dressers with missing knobs, an entertainment center that sagged in the middle and was cracked halfway up its side, and 2 badly stained mattresses. Should we offer to help them? My husband murmured next to me as we sprawled on our bellies, peeking at them from the floor. His tone was unenthusiastic. We watched them try to lift a heavy wood dining table, watched Ricky drop his end and scream, "God damn it, woman! Angle it! Just angle it!" Watched Crystal lose her grip on the table, watched the legs of the table wobble unsteadily on the concrete as Crystal burst into tears. I don't think so, I said finally. They seem to have it under control. We crawled on hands and knees into the kitchen and made margaritas that we drank out of straws while lying on the living room floor so they couldn't see our silhouettes moving around the house. We got so drunk we passed out there and woke up at 4 a.m. dehydrated and itchy. We peeked out the window and their house, usually brightly lit at that hour, was dark and there was no sign of their car. It was strange how everything fell apart after they left, as if our mutual hatred of the Fletchers had been holding us together. I caught one cold and then another. A fever sent me to bed for a week and gave me dreams of hazmat suits and children with no noses. When I came out of it, the squalor of our house was overwhelming. I felt a kind of sadness I couldn't explain. We didn't know it when we'd rented, but our house had been unoccupied for 3 years. Only we'd been stupid enough to be fooled by a cursory coat of new paint and a neatly trimmed patch of grass. Only we'd been silly enough to walk around through the rooms with our landlord, delighting over the built-in mid-century modern table and bookcases gushing, "This would cost a fortune in San Francisco." Weren't we delightfully clueless? So much so that we couldn't see the tree rotting in the backyard, that we mistook rock for artfully placed crystals of desiccant. Even when I felt better, I lay in bed and spent more days reading magazines in the living room with the air conditioning cranked, and went through vodka and orange juice quicker than bread or milk. It was so quiet without the Fletchers. And wasn't it as easy to sink into the sofa as it was into the bottle? While my husband was at work, I made lists of things to talk to him about when he got home. The Fern Museum, the formica that peeled in the second bathroom, the buzzing sounds that sometimes came from the attic during the day. When he got home, I talked at him until he held up his hands and said, "Enough, enough." And then, "What happened to the living room?" "The magazines," I said. I tried to organize the magazines. They were scattered everywhere, piled on the coffee table and on the chairs. "I can't come home to this," he said, "especially if you aren't working." He gave me a funny look. "Are you drinking during the day?" he asked. And I lied. Finally, even the bats turned against us. Bats in the belfry, bats in my hair, baby bats starting a new life in our attic. Those bats that we'd watched each evening had taken up residence in our attic. They were up there mocking me, echolocating themselves into colony-wide orgies. Our empty house with its wide air ducts gave them easy access. They flew through our bedroom, they hung off the ceiling fan, they squeaked and squealed and kept us awake at night, flapping through the yard. One had come up through the bathroom drain and had clearly reported back to his friends. I knew because bat droppings littered the kitchen, and one afternoon a wrinkled face peeked from behind the entertainment center with wide, sleepy eyes. And all I could think about were the vampires and the scratchy VHS tapes of Dark Shadows I'd watched as a kid. My husband chased them with a tennis racket. I was put in charge of finding someone to kill them. The first exterminator said he couldn't move them as they'd built a roost filled with tiny bat babies. It violated preservation acts, or at least some kind of natural law. His words, not mine. The second exterminator told us that the baby bats were called pups, as if they were pleasing little dogs instead of leathery clumps. That exterminator's left iris was covered with a thick, milky white glaze, damaged, I imagine, by the types of chemicals that are used to kill mammalian life, large and small. It was that eye of his that let me ask how to murder them. Did he have a shop vac? Couldn't he just suck up the pups where they hung in those gray, mucusy-looking sacks? "I don't think so," he said. "I could lose my license." "Let's pretend this never happened," I said to him. Everyone really did get a second chance. Some people got more than that. I told myself over coffee with the third exterminator. He was also a recent transplant to Florida, a recovering meth addict. He was missing most of the hair on his head due to a fire. He told his story with a smile, as if remembering a more peaceful time. My husband offered him money, dinners, companionship, all to entice him into a little bat genocide. The exterminator offered to come back in 4 months once the bats were old enough to leave the roost on their own. We talked about abandoning everything, vanishing, leaving the house to the bats and the roaches, to the mold and the mildew. But our discussions were circular. We kept coming back to my unemployment, our debt. We watched the bats exit the house each night. We drank more wine from plastic cups. We went inside and tried to do a little procreating ourselves. It was animalistic, primal. It was less fun after a week. We called a fourth exterminator. He was only 6 months sober, and his hands shook when he lit a cigarette on our patio after inspecting the attic. He stared into the tip as though it was telling him what to say, like it was saving him. When we offered him money, he said, "I'm a Christian," and then, "I'm really trying to get my life together." We ended up keeping our $50. "We can't live like this," I said. "When did exterminators get so ethical?" said my husband. It was the thick of summer. My long-dead grandmother's trick of hot drinks for cool days was useless when the heat never let up. My husband left the house at 5 a.m. to run and came back 45 minutes later, soaked and panting. The vegetables I planted all that spring shriveled and died, and still at night, there the bats went, circling overhead, taunting us. Our landlord's phone was disconnected. Still, we called and hung up. We lived this way for weeks, Fletcherless, landlordless, bat-infested. One Saturday, we'd had enough and rode our bicycles into town. It was mid-afternoon. The weather dial on the bank said it was 100 degrees. We peeled damp shirts from our backs. We ate ice cream and shared bites of mint chocolate chip. Everything felt like it was happening underwater, in slow motion. These other lives, these Florida lives. "I don't think we're Florida people," my husband said at last. "At least I'm not." I didn't respond. This was this thing we did. We were an us, and then it was you. He took another lick of his cone. It was melting fast now, even though we were sitting in the Arctic chill of the ice cream parlor. The bright green cream ran down his forearm, and he chased it with his tongue instead of wiping it with a napkin. "And what," I said finally, "do you think makes someone a Florida person?" He shrugged. "I think people who do well here just care less," he said. "To really live here, to really make it home, you have to stop caring." His face was flat, the opposite of the back of the taxi, the opposite of hiding on the floors from the Fletchers, the opposite of Florida. Maybe he cared too much. But it was the opposite of everything I wanted to be true about him. I wanted to ask him what he thought, when he thought I stopped caring, when he'd started to think about me as different than him. But instead, I took another bite of my ice cream. "Maybe it's the weather," he said finally. "My people aren't built for it. I feel like it must be like this in Jamaica all the time. You have the temperament for it. It's in your DNA. You can stand being uncomfortable." He was right. I could stand heat. I could stand being uncomfortable. I was from an island of plantation slaves, and I knew it. He was from a state of plantation slaves, and he had forgotten, or worse, pretended to have forgotten. I wanted him to keep going, to tell me what else I was built for, what else I was good for. Instead, I pretended an accident and knocked the ice cream out of his hand. He cleaned it up, wiping up the splatters on the table with a napkin, then chugged water from a bottle he had belted around his waist without offering me a sip. We were both hot and cranky, I told myself. I was overreacting. We left the ice cream shop and made our way to the library, where it was cool, dark, quiet, and heavily air-conditioned. We got library cards, registered to vote, felt official. Searched the card catalog for books on bats. We stayed until the sun started to set, trying to forget that when it did, the roost left our house and went out to collect bugs to bring back for the pups. That was what the books told us. We passed them back and forth on the library tables, pausing every so often to lick the residual stickiness off of our fingers and forearms. My husband read about bats that might bite while we slept, infecting us with rabies. Where can we get mosquito netting? Where can we get a tarp? Should we sleep in the car? Let's. We put the bikes in the backyard and crawled into the SUV with provisions. We pushed down the seats, spread out a blanket, opened the sunroof, and poured wine. They came back, one or two at a time, and then they blanketed the sky over our heads. We listened to NPR, sipped Pinot Grigio, and wondered how many nights we could stay like this, smashed into the backseat of our car. We each started to say something and then stopped. The voices of a call-in talk show about cars washed over us and lulled us to sleep, each on our own side of the SUV. We called animal control in the light of day. We explained the rabies situation. They told us to keep the attic closed, warned us again about the fines. "We can't stay here," I said. "This isn't working." There was nowhere else to go. We fell back into old habits, doing all the things we did in the days, weeks, and months before our Florida lives. We bickered until our eyes glazed over before retreating to our separate corners. Sometimes one of us would crack a door. We whispered, "Are you okay?" "Yes," "No," "Kind of." The weight of it all was crushing. Money, the past, all the things Florida was supposed to teach us to forget, all the things the silence said were past us. We drank coffee with Baileys, fought, got tired, and fought in other rooms. I hate you more. My husband slept on the sofa, and I curled up on the second bedroom futon. It was like that for weeks. He stopped coming home after work. I stopped cooking dinner, stopped killing palmetto bugs, stopped spraying the back lawn with herbicide, and let the crabgap grass take over. We became everything we hated, everything we had been in San Francisco, not all at once, but a little at a time, until we woke up from our separate corners and tried to remember what we loved or even liked. And then they came back. The Fletchers. It had been nearly 4 months. On a Saturday morning, we were grumbling at each other when the pickup truck snaked into the cul-de-sac. I was bleary-eyed at the window, waiting for the coffee to percolate, trying to get in touch with my humanity. They cut the engine before they reached the house, coasted the last few feet, and threw up the parking brake. My husband mixed his coffee, not enough cream, too much sugar. It's them, I whispered urgently because I was kind of excited. Who, he asked without turning around. Crystal and Ricky. They were at our front walk by the time he joined me at the window, and we both stared kind of slack-jawed as they shuffled towards our house. They rang the doorbell, and when my husband threw open the door, we understood why they'd left. Asbestos had been the official reason they'd given us, but standing there on our doorstep, Crystal, visibly pregnant, with her t-shirt, save the drama for your mama, barely covering her belly, a sliver of pale white taut flesh peeking out, it seemed reason enough. Hi, she squealed, coming in without being invited. She grabbed me for a hard hug. Have you been? Her arms were thin and spindly, but she held me tightly with a warmth I didn't expect. Good, I said, trying to squirm out of the embrace. Ricky and my husband shook hands awkwardly and stood around with their hands in their pockets until my husband ushered us all into the living room. He sat on the love seat. I retreated to the couch by the window, wrapping the bathrobe around me. We came by to tell you all about the baby, she said, patting her stomach. My parents bought us one of them new places out near the interstate. I remembered the advertisements for the new modular homes with imitation granite countertops and laminate flooring that looked like hardwood. That's fantastic, my husband said. Congratulations, I said. And y'all, Ricky said, how have y'all been? We paused for a moment. I looked at the window with the stupid drapes. They clashed with the carpet and the couch and every other thing in the room. Not good, I said. I told them about the bats, the attic and the roost, about the damp little pups and the rabies. Tears came to my eyes when I talked about the exterminators. Shit, Ricky said when I got to the end of my story. What a mess. My husband shrugged. What can you do? He paused for a moment. We'll just have to wait it out. His tone was funny, the same one he'd taken the day with me with the magazines. The same one he took with me a lot lately, like he couldn't stand me, like I was an idiot for sharing our misery with these people who weren't friends or family. And maybe he was the one who was uncomfortable, not just in Florida, and maybe I could stand the discomfort and the Fletchers and even the bats. That shit can be dangerous, Ricky said, I know that much. I nodded again and felt the tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. I wasn't sure why I was crying, but Ricky was so gentle then, and I started to like him because he was worried about my safety, and I thought then that he would be a great father. And I looked at my husband, who looked more frightened by my tears than by the warning of the bat shit, who mouthed, "Stop it." Can I make anyone a drink? My husband asked, getting up. He didn't wait for an answer, just went into the kitchen, where we heard the clatter of ice cubes. Crystal rubbed her belly, and Ricky's hand seemed to reach for it too, without even thinking. I imagined how I must have looked to them, standing in a dirty living room, wearing a dirty t-shirt and framed by several baskets of laundry heaped with clothes, both clean and dirty. I'd forgotten which was which. Wasn't I just one set of cartoon bed sheets away from being them? My husband came back with a pitcher of something red and something sweet and smelling of rum, and I knew he was done with the conversation. So what you gonna do about them bats, buddy? Ricky asked, sloshing a drink from the pitcher into the cup. Wait it out, my husband said, or move. Man, that bat shit could make it so y'all can't have kids, Ricky said. Let's hope, my husband said, raising his glass, toasting our never babies. I couldn't look at him then, and so I looked at Crystal, who was shaking her head. No, she muttered, no, that's just not right. Ricky looked at me sternly, like it was with a warning. No, ma'am, Ricky said, we can't have our friends here, not safe. And Crystal and Ricky looked at each other, reading each other in a way we never could, never would, no matter how close we tried to be. There was poison in the back of that truck. Probably enough to render me permanently infertile, definitely enough to give their baby a serious birth defect. But we didn't ask why they had it. The three of us sat amid the crabgrass in the backyard and smoked cigarettes while Ricky went up to the attic with a tea towel tied over his nose and mouth. Crystal lay in the grass running through the potential baby names: Destiny, Ariana, Dwayne, Buster. Each sounded more doomed than the last. Girls who would end up dancing in clear heels, boys with collections of mugshots instead of school photos. But I asked her for more and listened to her explanations of why she liked each and what she hoped for their baby. She wanted a boy, so did Ricky. She wanted a linebacker, a quarterback, but wouldn't be disappointed to get a little girl she could dress real cute. My husband sat with his back to us, pretended not to listen, and pushed the tips of his fingers together to form a steeple. I wondered if he was thinking the same thing I was. All those talks about those imaginary children we were going to have, those little pups, young, gifted, and black, that would be ours. When Ricky came back, it was with 3 huge, mushy-looking garbage bags filled and tied tightly. "I just got the babies," he said. "After the others leave tonight, you'll want to seal the attic up nice and tight. Some of them grown ones might die also, but I tried to spray away from them." I felt a little sick listening to him. "Besides," Ricky said, "they won't come back once they find their baby's gone." Like us, when things didn't work out, they tried to start over somewhere new. "Thank you," my husband said, shaking his hand. Crystal and I exchanged another hug. "You be well," she said, taking my forearms and looking into my face like she was searching. "You call me anytime." She squeezed my arms tightly and said again, "Anytime." "Take care," I said. "It was good to see you. I'll see you real soon." And I got it then, that they were mine, Crystal and Ricky. They understood something about Florida life that my husband never would. They understood starting over and sadness and frustration. They understood what it meant when you needed a second chance or a third or a fourth. They understood something about us, about me, that my husband wouldn't. Maybe my husband hadn't seen that. I was a Florida person, after all. That night, we dragged the chairs out for the last time. The evening sun had just begun to dip in the sky, and the houses in the cul-de-sac were lit with a deep orange glow, making them look less like prefabricated shacks and more like cottages, places where anyone could be happy. We knew then that we were done with our Florida lives, done with each other. Tomorrow or the day after, one of us would leave. We would split the contents of the ramshackle house and try to start over again, without drinking, without each other. The two of us were quiet for a moment, looking all around us instead of at each other, until finally my husband opened the bottle of Chardonnay, slick with sweat, and poured the yellow wine into plastic cups. We knocked them slightly and toasted the Fletchers, the palmetto bugs, and the bats. We toasted new beginnings, real and imagined, the cool, crisp air of the San Francisco Bay, the smoky heat of an Apopka afternoon, and this night too, heavy with the weight of the future. We watched the first 1 or 2 bats come out from the top of the house. Lights turned on, and a blue-green glow began to come from the other homes in the cul-de-sac. Each window lit up like a beacon as the sky got darker and darker. And then, all of a sudden, out flew the bats, a thick black sheet, flying so close to our heads that we could almost touch them, and we heard the meaty thumps of their wings. They moved out and up, away from the house, away from their dead babies, the last part of our Florida lives gone into the last bit of purple wilting in the sky before it went completely black. Thank you.